When life starts pressing you from every side, when the weight on your chest feels heavier than your own breath, when the questions outnumber the answers, you need to pause and remember one unshakable truth. Your God is not intimidated by what intimidates you. The storm that looks too loud for you is silent before him. The mountain that looks too high for you is dust beneath his feet. The valley you're trying to crawl through, he can speak one word and light floods in. See, struggles shout, they threaten, they whisper fear into your mind. But God doesn't shout to compete with your problems. He simply stands taller than everything you face. When he steps into your situation, the size of the struggle loses its voice. Sometimes God allows the struggle not to break you, but to reveal who stands with you. Your faith grows when you see that what looked like the end was actually the setup for his glory. The challenge becomes the classroom. The pressure becomes the pulpit. The struggle becomes the stage where his strength is made visible. You might feel surrounded, but you're not abandoned. You might feel weak, but you're not helpless. You might feel overwhelmed, but you're not overlooked. Because God has a habit of taking what seems small in your hands and turning it into victory in his. He is not asking you to be stronger. He's asking you to trust the one who already is. He's not asking you to understand everything. He's asking you to take one step with the faith you have left. Lift your head, square your shoulders, wipe those tears. Your struggle is not the final chapter. It's the doorway to the power he's been waiting to show you. When the enemy says, you can't, God says, watch me. So speak to your fear with confidence. Speak to your burden with boldness. Speak to your struggle with authority. Because the God who parted seas, shut the mouths of lions, broke chains in prison cells, and raised the dead has not retired. He is still moving, still healing, still delivering, still leading his people out of the fire without the smell of smoke. Hold on. Even if your grip is weak, his grip on you is not. Stand firm. Even if your legs are trembling, his foundation never shakes. Believe again. Even if your faith feels smaller than a mustard seed, he can grow it into something unstoppable. Your struggle may be loud, but your God is louder. Your pain may be deep, but his love is deeper. Your battle may be fierce, but his power is greater. Your struggle may look big, but God stands higher than anything trying to break you. And that truth becomes clearer the moment you pause long enough to look beyond what your eyes can see and listen deeper than what your circumstances are screaming. Because every struggle carries a voice. It tries to convince you that you're outmatched, outnumbered, and out of strength. It magnifies itself until it fills your thoughts, your emotions, your decisions, and sometimes even your prayers. It becomes a shadow stretching across your life, making you feel smaller than you truly are. But the problem is not the size of the struggle. It's the size of the perspective through which you view it. When you measure your battles against your own abilities, they will always look enormous. When you measure them against God's sovereignty, they shrink to their rightful place. There are moments when life throws pressure so heavy that your own voice feels too weak to respond. Situations pile up. Financial strain, broken relationships, sickness, loneliness, uncertainty. And suddenly the weight becomes more than your heart knows how to carry. Fear starts to rise. Doubt crawls in. You begin to wonder if this is the moment that breaks you. But in those same moments, God stands untouched by what is shaking you. He is not pacing in worry. He is not overwhelmed. He is not surprised. He does not check heaven's resources to see if he has enough strength left to rescue you. He remains unshaken, undefeated, and fully capable. Your struggle may be loud, but he remains louder. Your problem may be tall, but he remains higher. Your fear may be strong, but he remains stronger when the storm is raging around you. Your instinct is to focus on the waves. You watch the wind, the noise, the chaos, and your heart begins to match the rhythm of everything that threatens you. But storms do not intimidate the one who commands them. He doesn't merely calm storms. He rules them. He speaks and creation bows. He moves and obstacles crumble. He whispers and the impossible loses its grip. Your struggle may have risen suddenly, but God has been standing eternal. Your situation may feel like it grew overnight, but God has existed before time began. What shakes you today is already beneath his authority. Sometimes God allows a struggle not to crush you, but to reposition you. You may feel like you're being pressed, but often that pressure is pulling you closer to his presence. You may feel surrounded by problems, but you are actually being surrounded by his purpose. Difficulty doesn't always mean defeat. Many times it means development. God uses struggles as tools. They expose what you can't see, strengthen what you didn't know was weak, and awaken the faith you forgot you had. You learn to pray with honesty, seek with hunger, and stand with confidence because you've seen that even at your lowest, God remains at his highest. Every giant in your life looks undefeatable until you look at it through God's lens. What appears unmovable is nothing to the one who splits seas. What appears impossible is simple to the one who forms galaxies with a word. What appears permanent is temporary when he steps in. You may be facing something that feels too big to handle, but God has no categories for a too big. He does not classify problems by size. He only operates by his will, his power, and his timing. So while you're measuring the height of your struggle, he's measuring the depth of your faith. While you're counting what's against you, he's preparing what's for you. While you're trying to figure out how to get through the situation, he's already written the outcome. There is no moment where your struggle grows beyond his reach. There is no night so dark that his light cannot break through. There is no distance too far, no weight too heavy, no fear too loud for him to silence. You may feel like your emotions are drowning you, but he is the one who lifts you above the waters. You may feel like you're standing in front of a wall that won't move, but he is the one who shatters barriers. You may feel like you're at the end of your strength, but he is the one who renews strength you didn't know was still inside you. And when you think you're alone, he stands right beside you. When you think the situation has swallowed you, he surrounds you with a presence that cannot be shaken. When you think the problem has gained the upper hand, he reminds you that he has never lost a battle. He doesn't ask you to be powerful. He asks you to trust the one who is. He doesn't expect you to carry every burden. He invites you to place them into his hands. Struggle tries to define you, but God has already spoken a greater definition over your life. Struggle tries to limit you, but God has already written a destiny beyond those limits. Struggle tries to block you, but God opens doors. No one can shut your struggle. Appears big only when you forget who stands above it. When you remember the greatness of the one who holds creation in place, the battle in front of you begins to lose its intimidation. The more you focus on him, the smaller the struggle becomes, because nothing that rises against you can ever rise higher than the God who carries you. The pressure you feel is often the platform where God reveals his strength. Pressure has a way of making you question everything you once believed. It whispers that you're not ready, that you're not equipped, that you're not capable of handling what's in front of you. It surrounds you until you start thinking the pressure itself is a sign that something is going wrong. But pressure is not always the enemy. Sometimes it is the exact ingredient God uses to shape you into someone stronger, wiser, and more anchored in him than ever before. The weight you feel is not proof of your weakness. It's proof that something is being formed within you that cannot be produced in seasons of comfort. There are moments when pressure comes so suddenly that it feels like the ground beneath you is shifting. Life brings unexpected news. Responsibilities increase. People depend on you, and your own strength feels like it's shrinking. You feel stretched, pulled, and tested in ways that leave your heart tired and your thoughts restless. But that intensity is not without purpose. Pressure exposes the places in your life where you've been relying on yourself instead of relying on God. It reveals the exact weaknesses that need his touch, the exact spaces that require his intervention. Without pressure, you might never realize how deeply you need his presence to complete what he began in you. Pressure is the environment where faith stops being a theory and becomes a lifestyle. Anyone can trust God when everything is calm, but real trust is revealed when options disappear and you must lean fully on him. Pressure forces you to decide whether your confidence comes from circumstances or from a God who never changes. It strips away the illusions of control and positions you to watch his strength take over where yours ends. And when you reach that moment, when you finally acknowledge that you can't carry it alone, that's when his power becomes visible in ways you've never experienced before. Every great testimony is born in seasons of pressure. Every breakthrough you admire, every victory you celebrate, traces back to a moment when someone chose to trust God in the middle of the squeeze. The pressure didn't destroy them, it positioned them. It was the place where God rewrote the narrative. It was the place where he proved that his strength is not limited by human limitation. What looked like the weight that would crush them became the stage where his glory was revealed. Pressure clarifies who you belong to, who sustains you, and who fights for you. Sometimes pressure comes because God is preparing you for a level you haven't walked in yet. Before he elevates you, he strengthens you. Before he increases your influence, he deepens your foundation. Before he places more in your hands, he ensures your hands can carry it. Pressure becomes training. It becomes stretching. It becomes spiritual conditioning. You may not like the process, but it is molding you into someone who can handle what you've been asking God for. Many of the blessings you desire require the kind of character that can only be formed under pressure. Without the press, the oil cannot flow. Without the weight, the muscle cannot grow. Without the challenge, the confidence cannot rise. Pressure also reveals what has been buried inside you. You discover resilience you didn't know you had. You uncover strength you didn't realize was already planted within you. You learn that the grace of God is not just a gentle comfort. It's a force that sustains you in the darkest moments. You learn that his presence is not just peaceful, it's powerful. And you find out that God can produce more through you in seasons of pressure than you ever imagined possible in seasons of ease. What came to crush you ends up becoming the very thing that crowns you with spiritual maturity. There are times when pressure isolates you, makes you feel like no one truly understands what you're battling. But isolation is often where revelation is born. In quiet places, away from the noise, God begins speaking clarity that you couldn't hear before. He begins giving direction that was hidden beneath distraction. Pressure slows you down enough to listen deeply. It pulls your attention away from everything temporary and brings your focus back to the eternal. The very weight you thought would break you becomes the doorway into a deeper relationship with him. And while you're under pressure, God never stands at a distance. He leans in. He watches over every detail. He knows the exact amount you can endure and the exact moment you're about to step into breakthrough. He doesn't allow pressure to touch your life without purpose. He knows how to use every heavy moment to shape your destiny. He knows how to turn discomfort into preparation and struggle into strength. Pressure doesn't have permission to destroy you. It only has permission to develop you. It cannot write your ending. It can only refine your beginning. Pressure becomes the place where your prayers gain depth. When everything is going well, prayer can feel routine. But when pressure rises, prayer becomes real. It becomes raw. It becomes unfiltered communion with God. You stop rehearsing polite words and you start speaking from your soul. And in that honesty, God begins to reveal himself in ways that silence fear and strengthen your heart. Pressure strips away the surface level faith and replaces it with conviction. It teaches you that his strength truly is made perfect in weakness. It teaches you that even when you are being pressed on every side, you are not crushed. You may feel the weight, but you will not fall apart because God is holding you together. What you're facing right now may feel like too much, but God specializes in stepping into situations that feel too heavy for human hands. The pressure is simply the space he uses to show you that his strength is not theoretical. It is real, active, and present in every moment you feel like collapsing. He does not reveal his power when you feel capable. He reveals it when you feel like you're at the edge. Pressure is not a punishment. It's a platform. It is the environment where God proves that his strength is far greater than anything trying to break you. His authority is not only seen in calm seasons. It shines brightest when everything inside you feels like it's falling apart. He uses overwhelm to bring you closer, to sharpen your dependency, to strengthen your trust, to anchor your heart in the reality that nothing touches your life without passing through his hands. First, you may feel like your life is caught in a storm with no shelter, but he stands above the winds that terrify you. You may feel like the future is collapsing, but he holds time in his hands. You may feel like circumstances are spinning out of control, but he commands every detail with precision. He sees the beginning and the end at once. He knows the outcome before the problem ever arrived. And while you see fragments, he sees the full picture. You're overwhelmed because you're living moment by moment, but he is guiding you from eternity. Your overwhelm does not scare him. It positions him to show you the depth of his authority. There are burdens you were never meant to carry alone. There are fears you were never meant to wrestle with in isolation. When overwhelm rises, it's not a sign that God has stepped back. It's a sign that he's inviting you to lean in. He stands ready to take what is crushing you and place it under his command. He stands ready to cover you when anxiety rises. He stands ready to strengthen you when your mind feels scattered. He stands ready to remind you that even when you cannot trace his hand, you can trust his authority. Overwhelm does not mark the end of your capacity. It marks the beginning of his takeover, and as you face each wave, each demand, each pressure, each unknown, you can be confident that nothing towering over you holds more power than the God who rules above it. What overwhelms you is still subject to him. What confuses you is still clear to him. What feels impossible to you is still easy to him. Everything that rises against you remains beneath his feet. Every fear that shakes you remains under his command. Every challenge that drains you remains inside his control. And the more you anchor your heart in that truth, the more you will recognize that your overwhelm is not the end. It is the moment where his authority becomes undeniably real in your life. Faith doesn't require full understanding, just a willing step toward him. There will always be moments where your mind demands explanations while your spirit is being asked to trust. Moments where logic reaches its limit, where answers are missing, where the path in front of you looks uncertain, unclear, or even impossible. That's where faith begins. Not in clarity, not in comfort, not in predictability. Faith begins where your understanding ends. You don't need a full map. You need the courage to take one step. You don't need every detail. You need the willingness to move when God whispers. Faith is not built on having everything figured out. It's built on trust in the one who already has everything in his hands. There are seasons when you wish God would lay out the entire plan. You want to see the timeline, the outcomes, the reasons behind every delay and every struggle. You want to know why some prayers take time and why some doors stay closed. But God often reveals his will in steps, not in sentences. He shows you direction, not destination. He gives you light for the next move, not the whole journey. Because if you had all the answers, you wouldn't need faith. If you saw the entire path, you wouldn't learn to rely on him. Faith grows in the uncertainty. It strengthens in the waiting. It matures in the place where you choose to trust even when you cannot trace his hand. Taking a step of faith doesn't mean you're fearless. It means you refuse to let fear make the final decision. It means you acknowledge the fear, but you move anyway. It means you recognize the doubt, but you refuse to surrender to it. Faith isn't the absence of questions. It's the decision to keep walking even when the questions remain. It's choosing obedience when your emotions are unstable. It's choosing trust when your understanding feels fragile. It's choosing surrender when your mind wants control. Faith says, I don't see everything, but I believe he does. I don't know how it will work, but I trust that he already made a way. I don't feel strong enough, but I know he is strong for me. Many people wait for perfect conditions before they act. They wait until the fear is gone, until the confusion settles, until they feel fully prepared. But faith rarely meets you in convenience. It calls you into commitment. It doesn't ask for confidence in yourself. It asks for confidence in God. Faith is God's invitation to step out of comfort zones, out of predictable patterns, out of self-reliance, and into dependency on him. And the moment you take that step, even if it's shaky, even if your voice trembles, even if your heart doubts, that's when heaven begins to move. Because God responds to movement. He responds to trust. He responds to the step, not the explanation. There are things God will only reveal once you move. Insights that only come once you obey. Breakthroughs that only happen once you step out. You may be waiting for God to speak, but sometimes He's waiting for you to walk, waiting for you to take the step that unlocks the next one. Faith is progressive. As you walk, clarity comes. As you obey, vision sharpens. As you move, provision appears. The miracle didn't happen when Peter stood in the boat. It happened when he stepped out of it. The blessing didn't appear while Abraham stayed in his homeland. It unfolded as he walked toward the unknown. Faith always requires movement before manifestation. Faith also protects you from being controlled by your own understanding. Your mind wants answers, structure, predictability. But your spirit knows that God works in ways your intellect cannot grasp. If you lean only on understanding, you will talk yourself out of what God has prepared for you. You will reason yourself into fear. You will analyze yourself into paralysis. Understanding has limits, but faith helps you rise above those limits. Faith teaches you to rest in the truth that God sees further, knows deeper, and works wiser than you ever could. He is not asking you to figure everything out. He's asking you to trust that He already has. There will be times when the step God asks you to take feels small, insignificant, or confusing. But faith doesn't judge steps by size. Faith judges steps by obedience. Even the smallest move in God's direction carries more power than the largest plan created without it. A willing step can shift outcomes, redirect lives, open supernatural doors, and dismantle spiritual barriers. That's why the enemy fights your movement. He knows that the moment you step, heaven responds. The moment you walk, fear loosens. The moment you obey, God begins unfolding what He prepared long before you face the challenge. Sometimes the step God asks for is emotional, letting go of what has wounded you, releasing unforgiveness, choosing peace instead of bitterness. Sometimes the step is spiritual, praying again when you feel empty, worshiping when your heart is heavy, seeking His presence when you feel distance. Sometimes the step is practical, taking action, starting, leaving, changing, building, or reaching out. Faith shows itself not in thoughts, but in steps, in movement. In obedience, you may not understand why you're being led this way. You may not see how the situation will turn around. You may not know why certain doors closed or why others haven't opened yet, but faith bridges the gap between what you feel and what God has declared. It allows you to walk on promises when you cannot walk on explanations. It helps you trust that even when the path is unclear, the guide is reliable. And the more you step toward Him, the more you see that He was never asking you to understand everything, only to trust Him through everything. And as you take each step, your faith begins to reshape your reality. Fear loses its authority. Doubt loses its influence. The unknown loses its threat. You're no longer walking based on what you see, but on who He is. And in that place, you learn the truth deeply. Faith doesn't require full understanding. Your situation may shout fear, but God's presence speaks power, victory, and peace. Fear tries to make its voice the loudest thing in the room. It shows up in your thoughts, your emotions, your decisions, and your expectations. It paints worst-case scenarios and convinces you that what you're facing is too big, too deep, too dangerous, too uncertain. Fear magnifies the problem until you forget the greatness of the one who walks with you. But God's presence carries a voice far stronger than fear. His presence doesn't argue with fear. It overrules it. It doesn't negotiate with anxiety. Every time fear tries to shout, His presence releases a whisper that carries more power than the loudest storm. Fear tells you that you're alone. God's presence answers that you are never abandoned. Fear tells you that you're not strong enough. God's presence reminds you that His strength is made perfect in your weakness. Fear tells you that things will fall apart. God's presence assures you that He holds all things together. Fear tries to convince you that the situation is out of control. God's presence declares that nothing is outside His authority. When fear raises its voice, it's not because it's powerful. It's because it knows what happens when you turn your ear toward God instead. Sometimes fear is loud because your situation is real. The problem is real. The pain is real. The disappointment is real. Faith doesn't deny reality. It simply chooses to anchor itself in a greater one. You can acknowledge the challenge without surrendering your peace. You can face the facts without forfeiting your faith. God's presence brings a stability that circumstances cannot shake. Even when everything around you feels unstable, His presence places a calm within you that defies human logic. That calm doesn't come from your strength. It comes from knowing who stands beside you. There are moments when fear seems to surround you from every angle. You try to think clearly, but your thoughts spiral. You try to stay strong, but your emotions feel heavy. You try to keep moving, but the weight of uncertainty slows you down. That's when God's presence becomes more than a spiritual idea. It becomes a lifeline. His presence steadies your heart when it's trembling. It lifts your spirit when it's sinking. It guards your mind when it's overwhelmed. His presence doesn't remove every storm, but it removes the storm's authority over you. You may still feel the wind, but you won't be swept away. God's presence speaks power. Not the kind of power that avoids battles, but the kind that wins them. When you feel powerless, His presence fills the gap. When you feel outnumbered, His presence shifts the balance. When you feel weak, His presence becomes your strength. Power doesn't always look like boldness. It often looks like quiet confidence says, this situation is big, but my God is bigger. This pain is deep, but His healing is deeper. This challenge is strong, but His hand is stronger. His presence empowers you to stand when you want to collapse, to walk when you want to freeze, to believe when you want to doubt. God's presence speaks victory, not because your circumstances change instantly, but because His word never fails. Victory doesn't always begin outwardly. It begins inwardly. It begins when His presence shifts your perspective from defeat to expectation. It begins when you realize that you're not fighting for victory, you're fighting from it. His presence reminds you that no weapon formed against you will prosper, that every battle has boundaries He controls, and that every trial is temporary. Victory is not a distant hope. It is the inheritance of those who stay connected to His presence. Even when the situation is difficult, His presence positions you to overcome, to endure, to rise. God's presence also speaks peace, a peace that doesn't depend on outcomes, a peace that doesn't evaporate under pressure, a peace that doesn't collapse when plans change. His peace is not emotional, it's spiritual. It doesn't come from the absence of problems. It comes from the assurance of His nearness. You can walk through fire and still carry peace when His presence goes with you. You can sit in uncertainty and still feel covered. You can face the unknown and still remain unshaken. His peace holds you steady when life tries to pull you apart. Sometimes the loudest voice in your life is fear, simply because you've been listening to it the longest. But the moment you shift your attention, the moment you pause and acknowledge God's presence, everything begins to change. You don't have to shout louder than fear. You just have to tune your heart to the one whose voice carries authority. Fear loses its influence when His presence fills the room. Anxiety loses its weight when His presence strengthens your soul. Doubt loses its grip when His presence settles upon you. His presence doesn't just comfort you, it transforms you, and as you walk through challenges, you begin to learn something powerful. Fear may be loud, but it is never final. Fear may show up, but it cannot stay. Fear may attack, but it cannot win. God's presence has the final word, always. His presence is your shield, your confidence, your courage, your anchor, your assurance, your covering, your victory, your peace. Let His presence speak louder than the situation, louder than the fear, louder than the doubt. Because the voice of fear may shout, but the voice of God declares something greater. And when His voice becomes the loudest in your life, fear loses its power. Victory becomes your reality and peace becomes your portion.